My name is Aaron Friedman, and this is Politodoxy. Today's topic, capitalism. While capitalism is a better system than socialism and communism, it still is a system that has much to be desired. And I think it's safe to say that capitalism has utterly failed us as an economic system because it has turned into cronyism, and now we have crony capitalism. I have many times heard of the big failures of socialism and communism, of the millions of deaths it has produced. But it has become taboo to criticize capitalism in conservative circles. Capitalism is also responsible for millions of deaths. Let's start with the obvious ones. Capitalism has brought you the poisoning of our waters with all kinds of chemicals, the endless lawyers who allow all these corporations to get away with it. It brought you slave labor in China, in concentration camps, which apparently we are okay now with it. And now for the one that is least obvious and should be talked about, the millions of people who died in the Congo when King Leopold of Belgium ordered the Congolese to produce the massive amounts of rubber he needed to fuel his war machine. Now, if you're a dedicated capitalist, I'm sure you're hopping mad right now and shouting, well, that's not real capitalism, much like the communists always say. Well, that's not real communism. There's a huge problem with that. One is that when you say that, you think to yourself that if you were at the top, then maybe you would have done a much more better job. You would have been a good Stalinist. Now, of course, that is a complete lie. If you believe that, then you are living in denial. You would have been just as much as a mass murderer Stalin was if you were in his place. And if we are going to take that line of argument, well, I would have been one of the good ones. Well, guess what? You would have been one of the dead ones as well. All of the pure intention communists, the good ones, they were all set to death. So back to the main point. You'll hear from the other side, well, that wasn't real capitalism. But it was real. It was real to the people who were affected by it. This is how we know that capitalism is not a virtue unto itself. And of course, as I said at the start of this episode, that capitalism is an infinitely better system than communism and socialism. But it also is a very flawed system with much to be desired, and we can fix all that. That is why I call myself a free market person, where it's very similar to capitalism, but it's different in its being actually a free market, open to everyone who is an American citizen. Now, outsiders, such citizens from other nations who want to do business with said nation of the free market, will also be allowed, but the government's role in the free market system would be to protect its own free market, even if that means hurting other markets in other countries. As we said in another episode, this is about also nationalism, to protect your own nation, and that includes protecting your nation's markets. We have seen the rise of capitalism throughout the rise of liberalism. America used to protect its own citizens from foreign influences. Then it embraced economic free trade because we were taught that capitalism is the highest virtue of any economic system, and it was about going against the Soviet Union, who were communists. While all of this was brought to you by people with good intentions, but as the saying goes, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. So we outsourced to China, started using slave labor, child labor, and wage slaves. And throughout this process, we abandoned our own working class and got in return very cheap products, which were almost always worse than the original. Do you remember when air conditioners were able to work for about 40 or so years and not need one filter change? Or refrigerators working for about 20 years or so? Washing machines, dryers, mixers, all of these machines used to work for about 10, 20 years, and you didn't have to buy a new one every 3 or 5th year. Isn't it strange? It's almost as if you don't even own anything anymore. You don't own that refrigerator. It's a subscription service. For about 5 years, you get a refrigerator, and after 5 years, you have to buy a new one. The same goes to every other appliance you have in your house. You are being ripped off and you don't even see it. Maybe you don't even care. Detroit used to be the auto capital of the world. Now look at it. Thanks to the unions. Now, how do we fix all this? Shouldn't we have any unions? The best version of a free market system is that we don't have any unions. We, the consumers, are the unions. The government has no control over who you get to serve, but if you decide to pollute the water, oh, you're in a hell of a lot of trouble. Tariffs is a tool that we use against our economic opponents. And with such aggressors like China, we don't do business, period. All the manufacturing of the most important products that could be used, such as medical equipment and medication, computer chips, computer software, and all other computer components, are produced here in the United States. Now, I've heard this thing, we should bring back all jobs from China and bring it back into the United States. Well, yes, of course, but as I said, only the best jobs with the highest paying rates, and which is vital for national security and economic security. But that's millions and millions of jobs that need to be filled, that are filled currently by Chinese, and quite frankly, we don't have that many people to fill them up. That's why we need to bring it back to our side of the hemisphere. As I've said in a previous episode, that these products should be produced on our side of the hemisphere so we can keep an eye on these products being produced, making sure that they are quality products and they are fit to be sold in the United States. Now, America has a very important role in the world, and we need to uncouple ourselves from Europe. Europe is going always to be engulfed in war. That's what George Washington understood. Our founding fathers understood it. Let them be what they want to be. We can have our allies. We can help them out when necessary. Not militarily, that's a different subject. We can work together with them just the same we can work together with any other country that is friendly to the United States. But we have no allegiance to Europe. We have an allegiance to our side of the hemisphere. That includes Canada and Mexico. Now, of course, above all else, America first. First allegiance is to the American nation, the American people, but also to this side of the hemisphere, which comes second in place. The Founding Fathers wanted us to be occupied with our side of the hemisphere, not Europe's. And bringing back all these jobs and splitting it between Canada and Mexico, first good thing we get is no more slave labor. So our products instantly become ethical. Now, how ethical depends on the country. Let's say Mexico, it will be maybe a little less ethical, depending how they would pay their workers. But first things first, we bring back those jobs and we split them between Mexico and Canada. Second thing that this is all an America First agenda, because the second thing that we get is less immigrants. For a lot of these people, it's about jobs. So why shouldn't there be more jobs available in Mexico for them? We get less immigrants, so it's easier on our immigration system, which, by the way, of course, 10 years, we need to take a break and assimilate those already here. And of course, we need to drastically reduce legal immigration and deport all illegals. Yes, of course, we understand all of this. But it's okay to work together with other countries. We've become isolationists, and I don't think that's the proper approach. I do think that we do have a responsibility to our side of the hemisphere, such as James Monroe explained, and this was the Monroe Doctrine, that we would take care of our side of the hemisphere, and if the British or any other European country gets involved here, we would kick them out, because we have a responsibility. It's okay to have responsibility. I see all these conservatives talking about that you should take more responsibility in your life, but not America. America should have no responsibility whatsoever, only to Americans. And of course, yes, America comes first, and whenever there is a conflict between who gets the benefit, American people or Mexico, Canada, or any other country, American people first. That's the way to go about this. But if we could benefit Mexico in the process, I don't see why we shouldn't. If we could boost Canada while propping ourselves up, I don't see any problem with that. I see this as a complete win. Also, bringing back all these products to our side of the hemisphere would secure them, and if something slows down or if something bad happens in the process, our military could take care of business. Not saying it would be necessary, I'm just saying in the worst scenario, we would be prepared. Which, of course, don't send in the military just because of one thing. We have to clarify all these things because everybody thinks we're jumping the gun here. No, I'm just throwing out the worst scenario, and in the worst scenario, we would be prepared. It's not like that we're going to have to board our ships and go over to China and make sure that our products arrive here on time. No, it will be much more easier. All these logistics will be easier. Now, that's one step closer to getting to a free market because no more slave labor, no more child labor. Wage slaves, that is still a possibility when it comes to Mexico, which also, by the way, it's not only Mexico because these are so many jobs that we'll have to bring over that also it could go down to other Central American countries. But even with that, it will build those countries up and boost their economies, and hopefully from that could come out a much more better economic system and governmental system. But it's not our responsibility to control their governments, but help out their government. Well, that's a different story. And if it doesn't hurt the American people, I don't see any reason why we shouldn't help out. And of course, in a free market system, no more blank checks whatsoever. Also, let's talk about the patent system. First things first, we know what Disney has been doing with Mickey Mouse. That copyright should have been taken out already, and Mickey Mouse should be available to the public. But for some reason, they still retain that copyright. Now we see how much corruption that is. Thank you, capitalist system. In a free market system, there would be none of that. Once it's out, it's out. And also, it blew my mind when I found this out. There are some people out there who own patents to all sorts of things, but they never do anything with those patents. They just keep it. And let's say you come up with the same idea. Now you want to do that thing that will hopefully work out and better your fellow man and society. And now you find out, wait a minute, it's owned by somebody else and they're doing nothing with it. So you go ahead, and you don't always know it's owned by somebody else. So you assume it doesn't. And if you find out, well, you think, well, they're doing nothing with it. And you do that idea and you start making money off of it. Then you get sued by those individuals who own that patent. And now you have to pay them for your idea. But they came up with it earlier. So now they own the idea. That's an absolute disgrace. This is your economic system at work. Capitalism at its finest. In a free market economic system, the society and the free market owns your ideas to an extent. Of course, it's your ideas, so you get to profit off of it. But if you come up with that idea and you don't do anything with it, then it's not yours anymore. Now it belongs to the market. Now anybody could use that idea. If you patent your idea and you do something with it, you make your product and hopefully it works out, then it's all good because you came up with an idea, it's your idea, and you're benefiting your fellow man by implementing that idea. But if you come up with an idea and you don't do anything about it, you don't get to sue other people who actually implement that. Now, after a few years, it becomes available to the public, and now anybody could copy it since you've made your amount of money that you're worth. Because even in this capitalist economic system, the same thing exists, that you get the profit for about 10 years because it's your idea, and after 10 years, it becomes available to the public because great ideas always belong to the public. But since you thought of it first, you get to benefit from it 10 years, or 5 years, or how many amount of years. The small details could be worked out later. Also, the same is with medical equipment. We are paying for all these countries' militaries by being there for them if they would need us. So guess what they get to do? They get to pay for their national healthcare systems, then laugh at the United States for why they don't have a national healthcare system, which, by the way, we shouldn't. And also, theirs, by the way, is also very hectic, and it doesn't work out that well as they say it does. But we pay astronomical amounts for healthcare in the United States and pay for their healthcare by proxy with our military. We take all that back. They would have to pay for their own military. Now they would be paying for their own healthcare and military. Prices would go up in those countries, and by contrast, prices will also go down in the United States because it would level the playing field. We are paying the cost because we have the most innovation, but these medical companies need to make their money. So we foot the bill. So by making prices go up in those countries, not by that much, but enough that it would bring and level everything and help out tremendously the United States. Now, of course, they would have to start paying for their own military. And who produces the biggest amount of arms? The United States. What does that mean for the United States? Well, it means more jobs, more GDP, more money. We shouldn't be getting involved in their wars anyway, so let them pay for their own wars. Now back to our economic system with healthcare subject, the United States government should stop paying for any such healthcare system. The government has gotten involved in too many places where it shouldn't and been too lenient to places that it shouldn't be lenient. The government regulates how many doctors could graduate from medical school. I just don't get that one. Why is that a thing? We should have as many doctors as we need. If we have more than we need, then those doctors would start competing. And the best prices win. That's only a win to the consumer. By artificially controlling how many doctors there are, what happens is an artificial shortage. The same goes to hospital beds. The government controls that as well. Also, the government doesn't allow a citizen from New York or California or any other state to buy healthcare from a different state. Meaning, if you are in New York, you can't buy health insurance in Ohio or Florida or any other state. You're stuck only with a New York plan. Well, that creates regional monopolies. That's your capitalist system. Let those companies compete. See who's the best provider. The same thing happened with LASIK eye surgery. The insurance companies didn't want to cover that. And in a few years, it went from about $2,000 per eye to $500 per eye. That's a huge drop. Why? Because this free market policy actually worked. Because free markets work. Let's look at the internet companies. In South Korea, they have a much more faster internet connection than in the United States because their government forces their companies to compete. So that means they not only have to compete in prices, but also improve in service. But in the United States, the government doesn't force the internet companies to compete. So what you get is regional monopolies where they understand this is their territory, this is my territory, and the internet does not get improved, prices do not get improved, and your capitalist overlords get much more richer. In this free market system, though, prices would be much higher than our current capitalist system because there would be only one sort of tax on the individual consumer, and that is a market tax. No more income tax, no more of that, all those different types of taxes. You get one tax so you could keep an eye on where your tax money is going and how much they are charging you. That means while everything would cost more, also you'll be making a whole lot of more money. Also, let's not forget, tariffs would be a thing, so sometimes prices would be more, but it would be at the protection for the United States citizens, and in the long run, it would pay out. But with no income tax and such, all these kinds of taxes that distract you, and you have no idea how much money you're actually paying, with this, you'll be able to see exactly how much you're paying. Now, there would be some other taxes on different types of things, such as an import tax, and so on and so forth, for big companies, tariffs, and other types of things that would mostly affect these big companies because, of course, they need to pay their fair share because they engage in the marketplace. The same goes to you as the consumer. Once you make money, it's your money, not the government's. If you choose not to engage in the free market, then you don't have to pay. If you somehow become self-reliant, self-sufficient, you move somewhere far away from everybody else, you buy some chickens, cows, you have a farm, a ranch, or whatever, you have all your food by yourself, you fix all your things, you don't buy anything, you have your own solar panels, so you don't need any electricity, and you have a water hole somewhere, and you literally do not need anybody, no big company, and let's say you don't use an internet connection or something, whatever. If you completely disengage from the free market, you don't pay any taxes at all because you are independent. This is Thomas Jefferson's dream. Even Andrew Jackson, if you decide not to engage in the free market, then it's your free money. The government has no claim to it. You work for that, you get the money. Now, I don't know what good it'll do for you having money if you don't need it, but it's yours. But if you want to engage in the free market, that's when you're going to pay your taxes, and that's how it's going to be recorded. The government will have no idea how much money you make. The government is not supposed to know that anyway. No more free welfare state. Oh, and now that's the big one. That's where things get very radical for most people. But no welfare state. You get to keep your own money as long as you don't engage in the free market, which, by the way, the vast majority, the super vast majority of people will still engage in the free market because that's how society works. And that's where all the taxes would come in, mostly. There would be other taxes, as we already discussed. And now here comes one of the most important things. Stop with the inflation. Inflation is the government conspiring against its own people, but this isn't only the government conspiring. These are the big banks, or the national banks, to be precise, who are actively conspiring against you, and you don't even do anything about it. You work hard for 50 years, then you find out that most of the money you save is now worth half that amount because inflation throughout those 50 years is now half from when you started. So they literally steal your money. That, in a sense, is slavery. Under this capitalist system, you are an economic slave to these big banks. Now, don't get me wrong. I have a more nuanced view on inflation. I see it as an economic tool because without inflation, the economy slows. Because if there is that worry of inflation, people spend their money because they know it won't be as much worth tomorrow as it is today. So inflation drives the market. But too much inflation is plain stealing. You work today for $10, let's say, because you want to buy a lunch that's worth $10 tomorrow. Then you find out, no, it's not actually $15 because inflation. That's stealing your money. Now, I'm not sure if we should get completely rid of inflation because I'm not an economist. And I understand there is some use for it, but if it is going to be used, it needs to be used with extreme prudency and make sure not to steal anybody's money. But now you have on the other side another problem, deflation. Now, with deflation, it's the opposite. Let's say I borrow you $20 because you wanted to buy 20 burgers. No problem. Except you're going to get fat and lazy, but that's your choice to make. Now, 2 months pass by, and the currency has been deflated. So now you could buy those 20 burgers for about $12. The money is worth more. So you have to pay me back $20. That's an $8 difference now. So you have to work much more harder in order to pay the correct amount. So we can see if we drastically reduce our inflation and increase deflation, what will happen? People who are in debt would be royally screwed. So of course we need to deflate the currency because it's so inflated that we need to now deflate it, but we need to deflate it very slowly that it will bring hurt. It's just no way going about this. But inflation brings even more hurt. So we need to decrease the amount of hurt that is happening. So first, bring it to a halt, inflation. Then we need to start the deflation process and very slowly, so people could catch up with it. I've heard so many times this argument that we need to get rid of pennies because it's not worth that much. Guess what? In the olden days, you used to be able to buy with a penny a newspaper or a sandwich. It was actually worth something. Now, granted, it used to be much more bigger, like a quarter, a little bit bigger than a quarter. But even the older ones, like the wheat pennies, they used to be actually worth something. You used to be able to buy a newspaper. So, of course, we should stop producing pennies now because we're paying more to create these little zinc devils. And, of course, we shouldn't take away the value of the penny. We have so much out there, I don't think we need to produce more. Instead, with the process of deflation, we will bring back the value of the penny, and if necessary, we would continue making more if needed. Now, here's another big question. What if in the time of emergency, the banks are going bust, the economy is falling apart, people are insecure, what do? How do we get out of such a situation? We need to print more money. Now, first things first, we need to get back on the gold standard. Of course, it wouldn't fix all our problems, but it's a big step in the right direction. Also, while going back on the gold standard, no country or anybody who's not an American citizen would be able to retrieve their gold. Only American citizens. American gold will stay in Americans' hands. The same is with American land. No other country will be able to buy American land. Only countries that are friendly to the United States will be able to rent land. And if you are a citizen from a different country, you will also be able to rent land, but you won't be able to own it. America's land belongs to American citizens. In the case of corporations, same idea. They would only be able to rent. As I've said, the free market is free for American citizens, even at the cost of foreign entities. Now back to the main subject. While the dollar would finally be secure with gold, there would come times when the economy slows and people get very worried and they don't know what to do and the economy goes bust. What do we do in such a situation? Now we need more money to rejigger our economy. That is where the Federal Reserve comes in. Now, of course, should we end the Fed? Yes, we should end the Fed. They are responsible for so much of this inflation. And they're not even federal. They call themselves the Federal Reserve. They're less federal than Federal Express. Now, we should have a Federal Reserve, a literal Federal Reserve. That is going to be the nation's bank, which would be controlled, of course, by the government of the United States, which, of course, the head of that would be the Treasury Secretary. No board of directors and such. There could be advisors for the Treasury Secretary, but none of that monkey business. Everybody would know who is responsible if things go awry. Now, what is the purpose of getting rid of the Fed only to bring it back? This Fed would be completely different than what we have right now. What we have right now is a monster. This Fed would be an actual Federal Reserve, a bank that would hold actual money in times of need, that, when needed, would unleash that money into the market to boost the economy. From where will it get that money? It would be a tax. Some amount of tax would go in per year, every year, into that system, and when needed, would unleash that money into the banks in order for the banks to be able to serve the public. And every year, we would refill it up with not printing more money and causing inflation, but with money already printed would go back into the safe. It's kind of like you putting away money for your retirement. It's not the government printing more money out of whole cloth, which devalues. Can you believe it? Why is it legitimate when the government prints how much money it wants and not when I do it? If I were to counterfeit, I would be put in jail, but the government does it every day. And to be clear, we're talking about the Fed here, not really the government, although they work hand in glove. They're not printing money based on anything, but this system would actually hold your money safe and, when needed, would unleash it. Now, this, of course, is my own theory, so it hasn't been tested yet, and I don't know the repercussions of it, and there may be some flaws in it. But how I see it, my theory, at least, theorizing right now, would not cause inflation. At least it shouldn't. I don't know. I'm not an economist. I don't know all these fancy banking stuff. All I see is common sense, and this is what makes sense to me. You want to have a secure amount of money for times in need, and you don't want to cause inflation when those times in need manifest themselves? Well, this seems to me the best way to go about this. This is just my common sense at work. I may be wrong, so do some critical examination on this one. But my sneaking suspicion is they probably thought about this. All these fancy economic professors and so on, they probably already thought of this. But they won't say anything about it because it's too commonsensical. And a lot of the problem is that the problem needs to exist because these people need you to need them. And by fixing it, they won't be needed anymore. So this is my sneaking suspicion. It hasn't been implemented or even suggested because precisely it will fix the problem. But that would be a much more freer economic system, the free market at its finest. This will be economic security. Now, before we end this, let's talk about what some have been probably screaming to the rooftops. What about all the poor people? No Great Society programs, the government won't be sending money, and no Social Security or anything like that. Who will help the poor people? First, let's make one thing clear. The Great Society programs did not do what it was supposed to do. I'll see how liberals love bashing the war on drugs. It did not work. Well, it did put a lot of drug criminals in jail, so there's that. But you love talking about the war on drugs and how it failed. Yet you never talk about the war on poverty that failed even more tremendously. Poverty was on the decline before the Great Society programs. But then it fluctuated into a line that has never gone down since. It goes up and down, but it always stays straight. As a matter of fact, people are more poor since the 1960s. So the entire Great Society program, is safe to say, was a complete flop. You talk about what about the poor? Well, it did not work. So the government did not do its job. So we could get rid of that and instead put in place what used to be our literal Great Society program. The religious organizations that used to feed the poor. Let's talk about what happened in Ohio for a sec. We have seen the government do literally nothing when the residents of Ohio needed the government to come in and help them out with the cleanup and move them out of that area till it's all cleaned up. But they didn't do anything. They did not even send a bottle of water. Then Trump comes in, delivers a whole bunch of supplies, and now the government finally decides, okay, you know what, maybe we should do something. But it wasn't until an American citizen decided to go in there and actually help out these people. Also, it kind of baffles my mind that the state of Ohio couldn't do anything. It's like, oh, wait, what are we paying taxes for? Can't Ohio? Okay, the federal government, yes, they should get involved, but they didn't. But can't Ohio do anything? That kind of baffles my mind as well. But here we had an American citizen actually doing the work that we normally say the government should do. But now it's too controversial to help out because we're talking about the actively ignored men and women, so we're not going to actually help them out. But this is what it used to look like when American citizens did the job that now the federal government does. And guess what? It worked. It did not only give people a purpose for life, It brought us societally and locally together. When someone in your community needed help, the whole community would come together and help them out. That's how it works in my community. We don't wait for government assistance. We have entire organizations dedicated to almost every problem there is to mankind, and we help each other out. That is one of the things that we have lost as a society. If you want to talk about the rise of extremism and polarization, this is kind of responsible for some part of the blame. When people stop communicating with each other face to face and stop helping out each other, oh, the government would take care of that. This is the end result. Communities have been broken apart because there is no camaraderie. I always hear this when people say, I remember when Democrats and Republicans used to be able to see face to face. Yes, because there was no other option. And maybe we should keep it that way. No, as a matter of fact, we should have kept it that way. When you as a Republican need your neighbor, a Democrat's help, and vice versa, at a different time and place, then while you are political opponents, and not really enemies, but opponents, you are even more than that. You are neighbors. In a sense, you're family. You are a national family. Ooh, that's that word again, nationalism. Yikes, can't have any of that. Instead, we're going to have all this racialism. Yeah, that's much more better. If you're wondering what the cure to racism is, it's nationalism. No matter skin color, ethnicity, religion, whatever. You're all one nation, and you all work together. But I digress. We need to bring back all these organizations. And by the way, they were spearheaded by religious people. Sorry, atheists. And to finally state the obvious, the government should get involved with all these monopolies. All of these monopolies need to be taken care of because when big businesses come together, it is a conspiracy against the consumer. Break up the monopolies, protect the consumer. That is the essence of the free market system. And now, this is the conclusion of today's episode. Open up the free market. I thank you very much for listening. Please share this episode. Share it with friends, with family, with whoever you know. Just share it. We need more people to understand these subjects. Leave 5 stars, follow on whatever platform you use, and you could reach out to me on email at politidoxy@gmail.com and stay political. Goodbye.